They thought they were intimidating just another helpless teacher at Pine Valley Elementary School, a petite woman, grading papers after hours in her empty classroom. The Crimson Riders MC saw Lily Mitchell as an easy target to expand their influence into the quiet suburban community. What these outlaw bikers didn't realize was that Lily's husband James wasn't just any protective spouse. He was a decorated Green Beret who'd spent 15 years conducting high-stakes operations against some of the world's most dangerous criminal organizations. Now, their attempt to terrorize a schoolteacher would transform a peaceful town into ground zero for a war against one of the region's most notorious biker gangs. The late afternoon sun streamed through the classroom windows of Pine Valley Elementary as Lily Mitchell finished grading her fourth graders' math tests. At 5'4", with a gentle demeanor that made her popular with students and parents alike, she didn't cut an imposing figure, but 15 years of marriage to a Special Forces operator had taught her to always be aware of her surroundings. So when two motorcycles roared into the nearly empty school parking lot, their straight pipes deliberately loud enough to rattle the windows, she noticed immediately. Through the classroom window, Lily watched two men dismount their bikes, both wearing leather vests adorned with the distinctive Crimson Riders patches. The taller one, sporting a greying beard and cold eyes, swaggered toward the school's entrance. A patch on his vest identified him as Ghost. His companion, younger and wiry with a jagged scar running down his neck, followed close behind. Lily's hand moved instinctively to her phone, but she kept grading papers, maintaining an outward calm that belied her inattention. The sound of heavy boots in the hallway grew closer until her classroom door swung open. Ghost leaned against the door frame, a predatory smile playing across his weathered face. "Well, ain't this cozy?" he drawled, his voice carrying an edge of mockery. "Mrs. Mitchell, right? Hear you've been causing some problems with our recruitment efforts." Lily set down her red pen carefully. Last week, she'd reported suspicious activity to the school board and police after noticing older teens lingering around the elementary school, apparently trying to make contact with students' older siblings. Now she knew why. "This is a school," she said evenly. "Children should be safe here." Ghost's companion, who introduced himself as Razor with exaggerated politeness, moved to perch on one of the student desks. "See, that's the problem, Teach. You're interfering with business opportunities. Makes our leadership unhappy." "The Crimson Riders are expanding into new ventures," Ghost explained, his tone darkening. "This neighborhood, these families, they're under new management now. Smart people learn to look the other way." Lily maintained her composure, though her heart was racing. James had taught her how to handle intimidation. Show no fear, give no ground, but don't escalate unnecessarily. "I think you should leave," she said firmly. "Now." Ghost moved closer, looming over her desk. "Or what? Your husband going to do something about it? That military man you're married to?" He chuckled. "Yeah, we know all about him. Probably some desk jockey playing weekend warrior. If they really knew about James," Lily thought, "they wouldn't be here." But she said nothing, simply meeting Ghost's gaze steadily. The biker's eyes narrowed at her lack of fear. "Here's what's going to happen," he continued. "You're going to forget what you saw. Tear up that report you filed. And when we start expanding our youth outreach programs, you're going to be very, very supportive. Otherwise..." He gestured around the classroom. "Kids can be so careless sometimes. Accidents happen. Be a shame if something happened to your students or to their favorite teacher." Lily's hand tightened on her phone beneath the desk, but her voice remained calm. "Are you threatening me and my students?" "Just explaining how things work now," Ghost replied with a cold smile. "Think about it overnight. We'll be back tomorrow for your answer. And Mrs. Mitchell?" His voice hardened. "Don't try calling the cops. We own half the force in this county." As the bikers turned to leave, Razor deliberately knocked over a stack of student artwork, sending papers fluttering across the floor. Their laughter echoed down the hallway as they departed. Lily waited until she heard their motorcycles roar, away before letting out a shaky breath. Then she picked up her phone and made a call. "James, we need to talk. The Crimson Riders just paid me a visit at school." She paused, listening. "No, I'm okay. But honey, they threatened the kids." Another pause. "Yes, they're coming back tomorrow." A longer pause as she listened to her husband's measured response. "I understand. I'll see you at home." Lily began gathering her things, her movements precise and controlled. As she picked up the scattered artwork, she thought about her students. Innocent children these criminals wanted to exploit. James had taught her that sometimes you had to take a stand, had to fight back against bullies and predators. She'd seen that steel in him, carefully controlled but always present, forged through years of combat and covert operations. The Crimson Riders thought they were dealing with a helpless schoolteacher. They were about to learn a hard lesson about judging books by their covers, and about the consequences of threatening a Green Beret's family. The evening sky darkened over the Mitchell suburban home as Lily recounted her encounter with the Crimson Riders. James Mitchell sat at their kitchen table, his muscular frame coiled with controlled tension as he listened. At 45, his short-cropped hair had begun graying at the temples, but his eyes remained sharp, taking in every detail of his wife's story. "They specifically threatened the students?" James asked, his voice carrying the calm precision that Lily recognized from their most serious conversations. In 15 years of marriage, she'd learned to read the subtle signs of her husband's anger, the slight tightening around his eyes, the measured way he controlled his breathing. Said accidents could happen, made it clear they're trying to establish some kind of recruitment pipeline through the schools. Lily wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. Ghost claimed they own half the police force in the county. James nodded slightly, probably exaggerating their influence, but there's usually some truth to those claims. Criminal organizations don't expand into new territory without inside help. He'd seen similar patterns during his operations against drug cartels and terrorist networks. Corruption was always part of their strategy. "What are we going to do?" Lily asked. "They're coming back tomorrow for my answer." James stood, moving to the window with the fluid grace of someone always ready for action. "First, we verify their connections." He pulled out his phone, dialing a number. "Mike, James Mitchell, remember that favor you owe me from Kandahar?" He listened briefly. "Need some information on the Crimson Riders MC, specifically their law enforcement connections in Riverside County." While James made calls, Lily pulled up news reports about the Crimson Riders on her laptop. The gang had been expanding aggressively across 3 states, following a pattern of intimidation and corruption. Local news coverage showed a steady increase in drug-related crimes and violence wherever they established themselves. "Got some initial intel," James said, returning to the table. "Mike's working federal task force now. Says the Crimson Riders are moving up from small-time enforcement to major drug distribution. They're targeting schools and community centers, building a network of young recruits to handle street-level operations." Lily's face hardened. "Using children as drug mules." "Classic cartel tactic," James confirmed. "Start them young, get them hooked into the life before they understand the consequences." Your report to the school board interrupted their first major push into this area. The phone buzzed again. James listened intently, his expression darkening. "You're sure? Thanks, Mike. Keep me posted." He turned to Lily. "Ghost, real name Eric Whitaker. Former enforcer for a Nevada drug ring. Did time for assault and attempted murder. His partner Razor has a similar record. They're not just thugs, they're experienced criminals." Lily absorbed this information, thinking about her students, innocent children these predators wanted to exploit. "We can't let them establish a foothold here." "No, James agreed, his voice taking on the tone she recognized from his mission briefings. We won't, but we need to be smart about this. They're not just two bikers anymore. They're part of a larger organization with resources and connections. More calls were made as night fell. James reached out to contacts from his Special Forces days, other veterans who'd transitioned into law enforcement or private security. Each conversation added pieces to the puzzle of the Crimson Riders operation. They've got a pattern, James explained, spreading out notes on the table. Start with intimidation. Establish control over key community figures, teachers, coaches, anyone with influence over young people. Once they've got leverage, they begin recruiting. Within 6 months, they've usually got a network of teenage dealers and runners in place. Lily studied the pattern, her teacher's mind analyzing the methodology. They're targeting elementary schools to get access to older siblings. Exactly. Younger kids talk about the cool older teens hanging around. Word spreads. They create a presence that seems normal, non-threatening at first. The phone buzzed one final time. James listened, then smiled grimly. Thanks, brother. That's exactly what I needed to know. He turned to Lily. Remember Staff Sergeant Peterson? He's working private security now. Says the Crimson Riders have been buying up properties around schools in 3 counties, setting up safe houses, distribution points. They're building an infrastructure, Lily realized. Yes, but they're moving too fast, getting sloppy. Your report scared them, made them show their hand before they were ready. James's expression hardened. Tomorrow, when they come back for your answer, they're going to learn they picked the wrong family to threaten. As midnight approached, the Mitchells finalized their plan. James made one last call, his voice carrying the authority of command. Listen up, brothers. Got a situation here. Some bad actors threatening schools, targeting kids. Need a show of force tomorrow. He listened, smiled. Copy that. 0900 hours at Pine Valley Elementary. Lily watched her husband work, seeing the tactical mind that had made him legendary in Special Forces shifting into high gear. The Crimson Riders thought they were intimidating a simple schoolteacher. Tomorrow, they'd discover just how badly. They'd miscalculated. The morning sun cast long shadows across Pine Valley Elementary's parking lot as Lily Mitchell prepared her classroom for the day. Unlike yesterday, she wasn't alone. James sat quietly in the back of the room, his civilian clothes masking his military bearing. To a casual observer, he looked like any other parent volunteer. Through the window, they watched Ghost and Razor arrive on their motorcycles, right on schedule. This time they brought 2 more riders, all sporting the gang's distinctive leather vests. The bikers swaggered toward the school entrance, clearly expecting their show of force to seal the deal. Mrs. Mitchell, Ghost called out as they entered the classroom. Hope you've had time to think about our conversation. His confident smile faltered slightly when he noticed James, but he quickly recovered. This is a private discussion. Your husband should leave. James stood slowly, his movements controlled and deliberate. Actually, I think I should stay. We need to talk about your recruitment strategy. Ghost's eyes narrowed. Listen, military. Man, this isn't your concern. Your wife needs to understand how things work now. Crimson Riders are moving in, and smart people don't get in our way. 15 years Special Forces, multiple combat deployments, specialized in dismantling criminal organizations, James said quietly. I understand exactly how things work. The question is, do you? Razor moved forward aggressively, but Ghost held up a hand, studying James more carefully now. Green Beret, huh? Impressive. But this isn't some sandbox war. We've got connections you can't touch, backing you don't want to mess with. You mean, like Detective Collins on your payroll? Or Officer Martinez, who looks the other way during your drug runs? James smiled as Ghost's expression shifted. Or maybe you mean your supply line through the abandoned warehouse on Cedar Street. The one you're using to distribute to 3 counties. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You've been doing your homework," Ghost said, his voice hardening. "Doesn't change anything. We're still taking over this territory." "No, you're not," Lily interjected, standing beside her husband. "You're not recruiting children here. You're not poisoning this community." Razor laughed. Tough talk from a schoolteacher, but accidents still happen, to students, to teachers, to their families. Before he could finish, the rumble of motorcycles filled the air. Through the windows, they could see dozens of bikes pulling into the parking lot. But these weren't Crimson Riders. These riders wore different patches. Veterans MC, Combat Legion, Warriors Brotherhood. "Remember those connections I mentioned?" James said quietly. "These are mine. Every rider out there has special operations training. They take a very dim view of criminals threatening schools." Ghost's confident facade cracked slightly. "This isn't over. You have no idea what you're starting." "That's where you're wrong," James replied. "I know exactly what I'm starting. Your entire operation, the corrupt cops, the distribution network, the recruitment strategy, it's all been documented. Right now, everything I know is being delivered to federal investigators who aren't on your payroll." "You're bluffing," Razor snarled, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Third floor of the Cedar Street warehouse, behind the false wall. That's where you keep your main drug supply, right? DEA is probably there right now. And your friends in law enforcement? Amazing how quickly dirty cops turn on their partners when federal investigators start asking questions." Ghost's face twisted with rage. "You're dead. Your wife's dead. Everyone you care about." "Think very carefully about your next words," James interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone intimately familiar with violence. "You're used to intimidating civilians, but you've never faced someone like me, someone who knows how to dismantle organizations like yours, piece by piece." The sound of police sirens joined the rumble of motorcycles outside. "Those aren't your corrupt local cops," James explained. "Federal task force. Seems your operation caught their attention. Amazing how much evidence turns up once people start looking closely." Ghost and his crew backed toward the door, their attempt at intimidation completely undermined. "This isn't over," he threatened, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, it is," James replied. "You just don't know it yet. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave this school and never come back. You're going to cease all operations in this county, because if you don't, everything I've gathered on your organization goes public. And trust me, your bosses in the Crimson Riders leadership won't appreciate that kind of attention." The bikers retreated, their swagger replaced by barely contained fury. As they mounted their bikes, they found themselves surrounded by veteran riders, each one conveying the unmistakable presence of trained warriors. Lily watched them roar away, then turned to her husband. "Will they really back off?" "They don't have a choice," James replied. "By now their entire operation is compromised. The smart ones will run. The others—" He shrugged. "Federal prison has plenty of room." The afternoon sun beat down on Pine Valley Elementary as James Mitchell sat in his truck, watching the school through binoculars. 2 days had passed since the confrontation with Ghost and his crew, and while the immediate threat seemed neutralized, James knew better than to let his guard down. 20 years of special operations had taught him that wounded predators were often the most dangerous. His phone buzzed with a message from Mike at the Federal Task Force. "Crimson Riders leadership called emergency meeting. Your intel was good. DEA seized over 200 kilos at Cedar Street warehouse. Multiple arrests." Before James could respond, another motorcycle roared into the school parking lot. But this wasn't a Crimson Rider. The patches identified him as part of the Veterans MC, Derek "Doc" Thompson, former Navy SEAL corpsman, now serving as James's eyes and ears in the biker community. "Got movement," Doc reported, approaching James's truck. Ghost and his crew were seen at the Broken Spoke bar last night, making calls, gathering numbers. They're not backing down. They're escalating. James nodded, having expected this. Pride, it's always their weakness. They can't let a school teacher and her husband humiliate them. How many are they calling in? At least 30 riders from neighboring chapters. Word is they're bringing in hardcore enforcers, real heavy hitters. And Doc leaned against the truck, his expression grim. These aren't just thugs, brother. Some of these guys have serious criminal records. Murder, organized crime, weapons charges. Inside the school, Lily continued teaching her 4th grade class, maintaining normalcy despite the tension. James had arranged for several combat veterans to pose as maintenance workers and parent volunteers, ensuring she wasn't alone. But the real protection lay in the network of surveillance and intelligence he'd established. His phone buzzed again, this time with photos from another contact. The images showed Ghost meeting with senior Crimson Riders at a location just outside. A town. The gang's patches identified them as members of the national leadership. They're taking this personally, James mused, showing the photos to Doc. Good. Means they'll make mistakes. Got more, Doc added, pulling out his own phone. Remember that corrupt detective you mentioned? Collins? He was found dead this morning. Single gunshot, made to look like suicide. Crimson Riders are cleaning house, eliminating potential liabilities. James's expression hardened. The gang was following a familiar pattern, eliminating loose ends, consolidating forces, preparing for a major show of force. He'd seen similar tactics during his operations, against drug cartels and terrorist cells. They'll try to reassert control, he said. Make an example of anyone who defies them, and they'll start with Lily and the school. As if confirming his assessment, a group of motorcycles roared past the school, their riders wearing Crimson Riders' colors. They didn't stop, but their message was clear. They were watching, preparing. Got our brothers standing by, Doc reported. Veterans MC, Combat Legion, Warriors Brotherhood, they're all in. These gangbangers want to threaten schools? They'll have to go through every combat vet in 3 states. James checked his watch, then made a call. Mike, need a status update on those federal warrants. Yeah, I know they take time, but Crimson Riders are mobilizing. We need to move faster. The response wasn't what he wanted to hear. Federal bureaucracy moved slowly, even with clear evidence of criminal activity. They'd have to handle the immediate threat without official support. They're going to hit hard, Doc warned. Make a statement. You sure we're ready for this? James thought about Lily, about her students, about all the families the Crimson Riders wanted to exploit. His years in Special Forces had taught him that sometimes you had to stand your ground, had to fight back against those who prey on the innocent. We're ready, he confirmed. Got surveillance on their key locations, documented their connections, mapped their hierarchy. When they move, we'll be waiting, and this time we're not just defending, we're taking their whole operation down. The afternoon wore on as James and his network of veterans maintained their watch. Inside the school, Lily caught his eye through the window and nodded slightly. She understood the risks, shared his determination to protect their community. The Crimson Riders thought they were just dealing with a schoolteacher and her military husband. They were about to learn they'd started a war they couldn't win. The storm broke at midnight. A convoy of motorcycles roared through the quiet suburban streets surrounding Pine Valley Elementary. Over 40 Crimson Riders, their chrome gleaming under streetlights. At their head rode Ghost, flanked by enforcers brought in from 3 states. James watched from his concealed position as they surrounded the school. His network had intercepted their communications. This was meant to be a show of force, a message that no one could defy the Crimson Riders and survive. All units in position, Doc's voice crackled through the secure radio. Veterans MC members were strategically placed around the perimeter. backed by former Special Operations personnel who'd answered James's call. The riders began their demonstration, throwing burning bottles that shattered against the school walls. The message painted in flames was clear: submit or burn. What they didn't know was that James had prepared for exactly this scenario. Hidden cameras documented every action as Ghost directed his men to systematically vandalize the building. Let's see how brave the schoolteacher and her husband are. When their precious school burns, he snarled. Target confirmed, came another voice through James's radio. Got positive ID on Marcus Kane, Crimson Rider's national enforcer. He's coordinating with Ghost. James's expression hardened. Kane was wanted in connection with multiple murders, a genuine heavy hitter brought in to handle what the gang saw as a serious threat to their expansion. Execute, James commanded quietly. Suddenly, powerful floodlights blazed from concealed positions, bathing the school grounds in harsh white light. The Crimson Riders found themselves caught in the open as federal tactical teams emerged from pre-planned positions. "This is a federal task force," boomed an amplified voice. "You are surrounded. Surrender your weapons and dismount your vehicles." Chaos erupted as some riders tried to flee, while others reached for weapons. They discovered too late that James's veterans had blocked every escape route, creating a carefully planned kill zone. "You set us up!" Ghost screamed, recognizing James. Among the advancing forces, "This was all a trap." "You threatened my wife," James replied calmly, moving forward with the practiced precision of a special forces operator. "You threatened children. Did you really think I'd let that stand?" Kane, the national enforcer, drew a concealed weapon but found himself facing Doc and 3 other combat veterans. His criminal experience meant nothing against their military. "Training! Full tactical response incoming!" crackled the radio. "State police have sealed off a 10-block radius." The battle was brief but intense. When it ended, dozens of Crimson Riders were in custody, their attempt at intimidation transformed into a devastating defeat. Federal agents moved through the scene, gathering evidence that would link this incident to the gang's larger criminal enterprise. "Found their burner phones," reported one agent. "Got text messages connecting them directly to drug distribution. Operations in 3 states. Ghost, his swagger gone, watched in disbelief as his power crumbled. "You have no idea what you've started," he threatened as federal agents cuffed him. "Actually," James corrected him, "I know exactly what I've started. Your entire organization has been compromised. Every corrupt cop, every distribution point, every criminal connection, it's all documented. This wasn't just about protecting one school. This was about taking down your entire operation." As dawn approached, Lily arrived to survey the scene. Emergency crews had contained the minimal fire damage, and federal teams were processing what would become one of the largest gang-related arrests in the state's history. "They really thought they could intimidate us," she mused, standing beside her husband. "They're used to people backing down," James replied. "Never understood they were dealing with someone trained to dismantle organizations like theirs. Pride and arrogance makes them predictable." The morning news would carry the story: how a gang's attempt to intimidate a schoolteacher led to the exposure of a major criminal enterprise. But the real story was simpler. They'd threatened the wrong family, underestimated the wrong veteran, and paid the price for their mistake. 3 days after the midnight raid, the impact of the Crimson Riders' defeat was still reverberating through the criminal underworld. James sat in Pine Valley Elementary's library, now converted into a temporary command center, reviewing intelligence reports with federal agents. The school board had suspended classes for the week, giving law enforcement time to ensure the facility's security. "Latest numbers are impressive," Agent Lily Torres reported, spreading files across the table. 47 riders in custody, including 3 senior leaders. "We've seized over $5 million in assets, documented connections to drug operations in 12 states, and uncovered a network of corrupted officials that goes deeper than anyone imagined. Doc entered, his laptop displaying surveillance feeds from around the county. Got movement on the outskirts. Remaining riders are pulling out, abandoning safe houses. They're running scared. James nodded, studying the pattern of retreat. They understand now. This isn't just about one school anymore. We've exposed their entire operation. Lily Mitchell joined them, having spent the morning helping federal agents understand the gang's attempted school recruitment strategy. The other teachers are coming forward now, she reported. Similar intimidation attempts at schools across 3 counties. They were building a pipeline, targeting vulnerable kids. Classic organized crime tactics, Agent Torres confirmed. Use schools as recruitment centers, establish presence in communities through fear. But they never expected this level of resistance. James's phone buzzed with updates from his veteran network. Crimson Riders chapters across the state were dissolving, their members scattering as federal investigations expanded. The gang's attempt to intimidate a schoolteacher had triggered a cascade of consequences they never anticipated. You know what really destroyed them? Doc mused, watching another surveillance feed of riders abandoning their territory. Pride. They couldn't accept being challenged by a schoolteacher and her husband, had to make a show of force, had to prove their power. And walked right into our trap, James agreed. Every act of intimidation, every threat documented, built a RICO case that'll take down their entire organization. Agent Torres's phone chimed with new intelligence. Ghost is talking, she announced. Giving up everything. Supply lines, corruption networks, leadership structure. Says he'd rather face prison than what the gang will do to him for this failure. Lily studied the maps, showing the extent of the gang's former territory. Hard to believe they controlled so much, terrorized so many communities. All those families afraid to stand up to them. People are standing up now, James said. Every community they intimidated, every business they extorted, they're all coming forward. Your resistance showed them it was possible to fight back. More. Federal vehicles arrived outside as the investigation expanded. What had started as a defense of one school had exposed criminal operations across multiple states. The Crimson Riders had thought they were simply pressuring a defiant teacher. Instead, they'd triggered their own destruction. Got something interesting, Doc called out, enlarging a surveillance image on his laptop. Remaining gang leadership, holding emergency meeting 2 states over. They're trying to salvage what's left of their operation. James moved to study the image. Let them try. We've got enough evidence to dismantle whatever they attempt to rebuild. Sometimes you have to take a stand, show predators they can't simply prey on the innocent. Lily touched his arm gently. They never understood what they were really fighting, did they? Thought they were just dealing with a schoolteacher and her military husband. No, James agreed. They never understood they were facing someone trained to dismantle organizations like theirs. Someone who knew how to turn their own tactics against them. Pride and arrogance makes them predictable. Outside, more former gang members were being processed as they surrendered, hoping to make deals before federal charges were filed. The Crimson Riders' attempt to intimidate their way into a new territory had backfired spectacularly, exposing their entire criminal enterprise to the light of justice. You know what really gets me, Agent Torres said, reviewing another confession. How many people they hurt, how many communities they terrorized, all those families afraid to stand up to them. Not anymore, Lily replied firmly. Now, everyone knows they can be beaten, that standing together against intimidation works. As evening approached, James watched federal teams continuing their work, dismantling the gang's influence piece by piece. The Crimson Riders had threatened the wrong family, underestimated the wrong veteran, and their empire was crumbling as a result. 1 week after the initial raid, James Mitchell sat in an emergency meeting at the county courthouse. The room was packed with law enforcement officials, school administrators, and community leaders, all grappling with the aftermath of the Crimson Riders' downfall. Latest intel confirms total disruption of their operations, Agent Torres reported. 53 locations raided across 5 states, drug distribution networks dismantled. Their entire criminal infrastructure is collapsing. James studied the bio-evidence wall they'd assembled, documenting the gang's former empire. Photos showed abandoned clubhouses, seized assets, and arrested members. The Crimson Riders' attempt to intimidate a schoolteacher had triggered an avalanche they couldn't control. "We've got a situation developing," Doc interrupted, entering with urgent news. Remaining gang leadership is mobilizing. They're calling in every favor, trying to salvage what's left of their operation. Our sources say they're planning something big. Sheriff Cooper, who'd been coordinating local law enforcement response, leaned forward. "How big are we talking?" "Major show of force," Doc explained, spreading surveillance photos across the table. "They're gathering whatever's left of their membership, planning to hit multiple targets simultaneously, show everyone they're still powerful." James recognized the pattern. Classic criminal organization response to loss of control. They'll target symbols of resistance, try to reassert dominance through violence. "The school," Lily said quietly. She'd been helping federal agents understand the gang's recruitment tactics. "They'll come for the school first, make an example of those who defied them." Agent Torres checked her phone as new intelligence arrived. Confirmed movement. Large groups of riders converging from 3 states. "These aren't just thugs anymore. We're seeing hardcore criminals, professional enforcers. They're desperate," James analyzed, "which makes them dangerous, but it also makes them predictable. They'll want to make a statement, prove their power. We can use that." The room shifted into tactical planning mode. James had seen this before, criminal organizations lashing out as their power crumbled, trying to maintain control through escalating violence. But this time, they'd be ready. "Got more," Doc reported, his laptop displaying intercepted communications. "They're not just planning attacks, they're trying to activate corrupt officials, calling in political favors, attempting to shut down our investigation through legal channels." Sheriff Cooper's radio crackled with updates. Gang members were being spotted across the county, preparing for what looked like a coordinated assault. Their previous defeat had taught them not to underestimate their opponents. "They think overwhelming force is the answer," James said, studying the tactical maps. "But they're playing right into our hands. Every member they gather, every corrupt official they expose, it all adds to our case." Lily touched the photo of Pine Valley Elementary, her expression determined. "These children, these families, they're worth fighting for, worth standing up to bullies and criminals who think intimidation equals power." James began outlining the defense strategy, drawing on his years of Special Forces experience. "They'll expect us to be reactive, defensive. Instead, we'll be proactive, use their own aggressive tactics against them." As night fell, the courthouse hummed with activity. Federal teams coordinated with local law enforcement, preparing for what everyone knew would be a decisive confrontation. The Crimson Riders were gathering their remaining strength for one final push to reclaim their territory. "Remember," James addressed the assembled teams, "they're not just fighting us anymore. They're fighting an entire community that's no longer afraid. Their biggest weakness isn't their dwindling numbers or exposed operations, it's their inability to understand that fear only works when people let it." Outside, veteran riders took up positions around key locations, ready to defend their community against the coming storm. The Crimson Riders thought they could intimidate their way back to power. They were about to learn another hard lesson about underestimating their opponents. The storm broke at dawn. Over 60 Crimson Riders roared toward Pine Valley Elementary, their chrome gleaming in the early morning light. Leading them was Marcus Kane, the national enforcer, determined to restore the gang's reputation through overwhelming force. What they found was an empty school building, dark and silent. No police presence, no visible opposition, just stillness. "Something's wrong," Ghost muttered, now released on bail and eager to prove his worth. "Mitchell's too smart for this. It's too easy." Kane dismissed the concern with a wave. "We've got 60 riders. Whatever trap they think they've set, we've got the numbers to handle it. Start the demonstration." The riders began their show of force, throwing burning bottles and spraying automatic gunfire into the air. Their message was clear: defy us and be destroyed. That's when the trap was sprung. Powerful spotlights blazed from concealed positions as federal tactical teams emerged from pre-planned locations. But this time they weren't alone. Veterans MC members, Combat Legion riders, and Warriors Brotherhood forces had joined them, creating an overwhelming response to the gang's threat. "Federal agents!" boomed an amplified voice. "You are surrounded. All exits are blocked. Surrender your weapons and dismount your vehicles." Kane screamed orders as chaos erupted. Some riders tried to flee, others opened fire, but they quickly discovered they were caught in a carefully prepared kill zone. Every escape route was blocked, every advantage nullified. James Mitchell moved forward with his tactical team, his military training evident in every precise movement. "You never learned, did you?" he called out to Kane. "Kept thinking fear and numbers were enough, never understood what you were really fighting." "Kill them all!" Kane ordered. But his command fell apart as federal snipers disabled multiple bikes, with precise shots to their engines. The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air as more tactical teams moved in. "Got the school surrounded," Doc reported through the radio. "No collateral damage. They played right into our hands." The battle was intense but brief. When it ended, the remaining leadership of the Crimson Riders was in custody. Their attempt at intimidation transformed into a devastating defeat. "Found their phones," Agent Torres reported. "Got direct communications with corrupt officials, drug suppliers, everything we need to dismantle what's left of their organization." Kane, his arrogance finally broken, watched in disbelief as his forces surrendered. "How?" he demanded as federal agents cuffed him. "We had the numbers, the firepower." "But we had something better," James replied. "A community united against intimidation, trained veterans who understand real combat, and, most importantly, we had you people believing your own mythology." Lily arrived as the sun climbed higher, surveying the scene with calm determination. Emergency crews were containing small fires, while federal teams processed what would become the final blow to the Crimson Riders' criminal empire. "They really thought they could win through fear," she observed, standing beside her husband. "Fear only works when people let it," James replied. "Once a community stands together, once they refuse to be intimidated, organizations like this fall apart." The morning news would carry the story, how a gang's final attempt to reclaim their territory led to their complete destruction. But the real story was simpler. They'd threatened the wrong family, underestimated the wrong veteran, and learned too late that true strength isn't found in numbers or intimidation, but in the courage to stand against those who prey on the innocent. Aftermath of the final battle transformed Pine Valley Elementary into a hub of federal activity. 2 days after the raid, James Mitchell stood with Agent Torres, reviewing the full scope of what their operation had uncovered. "The numbers are staggering," Torres reported. "Over 80 Crimson Riders in custody, including their entire leadership structure. Seized assets exceeding $20 million. Drug distribution networks across 5 states completely dismantled, but more revelations were coming. The gang members, facing lengthy federal sentences, began turning on each other. Each confession exposed new layers of corruption and criminal enterprise. Kane's talking doc announced, entering with fresh intelligence, giving up everything, political connections, corrupt judges, dirty cops. Says the organization's finished, no point in keeping quiet anymore. James studied the evidence boards covering the library walls. What had started as a defense of one school had exposed a criminal empire. Photos showed seized properties, confiscated weapons, arrested officials, the complete dismantling of a criminal organization that had terrorized communities for years. "Got something interesting," Agent Torres said, reviewing new files. "Remember those school recruitment programs they were planning? Turns out it wasn't just here. They had similar operations in dozens of schools across 3 states. Using intimidated teachers to identify vulnerable students, building a network of young drug runners. Lily, who'd been helping interview other threatened teachers, shook her head in disgust. All those children they were planning to exploit. All those families they would have destroyed. But they didn't, James reminded her, because one teacher refused to be intimidated. Sheriff Cooper arrived with new reports. Former gang members were surrendering across the region, hoping to make deals before federal indictments came down. The Crimson Riders' reputation for invincibility was shattered. You know what really finished them? Doc mused, watching another group of arrested riders being processed. Pride. They couldn't accept being defeated by a schoolteacher and her husband, had to make that final show of force. And walked right into our trap, James agreed. Every aggressive move they made just gave us more evidence, exposed more of their operation. Outside, federal teams continued processing seized evidence as news crews gathered. The story was spreading, how a gang's attempt to intimidate a teacher had led to their complete destruction. Latest from the FBI task force, Torres reported, checking her phone. They're using our operation as a template, setting up similar investigations in other regions. What happened here exposed vulnerabilities in criminal organizations nationwide. Lily watched as more former gang members were brought in for questioning. They really never understood what they were fighting, did they? Thought they could control everything through fear and violence. That's their weakness, James explained. Organizations like this can't comprehend resistance. They're so used to people backing down that they don't know how to handle someone standing up to them. The evidence of their complete defeat was overwhelming. Financial records showed their criminal empire crumbling, their assets seized, their members scattered or imprisoned. The Crimson Riders had thought they could intimidate their way to power. Instead, they'd triggered their own destruction. "You know what's really remarkable?" Agent Torres said, reviewing another confession. "How many people are coming forward now? Every community they terrorized, every business they extorted, they're all telling their stories." "Because they're not afraid anymore," Lily replied. "Everyone can see that standing together against intimidation works." As evening approached, James watched federal teams continuing their work, dismantling the last vestiges of the gang's influence. The Crimson Riders had threatened the wrong family, underestimated the wrong veteran, and their empire had fallen. As a result, 1 month after the final battle, Pine Valley Elementary hosted a community gathering. The parking lot was filled with families, veteran riders, and law enforcement officers celebrating their victory over organized crime. The school building, fully repaired and secured, stood as a symbol of resistance against intimidation. Final numbers from Washington, Agent Torres reported, joining James and Lily at the celebration. 120 total arrests, including their entire leadership structure. Over 30 million in seized assets. Criminal operations disrupted in 5 states. But the real victory wasn't in the numbers. It was visible in the faces of community members who no longer lived in fear, in teachers who could focus on education, instead of gang threats, in families who knew their children were safe. "Got word from the Justice Department," Sheriff Cooper announced, approaching with news. "They're using our operation as a template, establishing similar task forces across the country. What happened here is changing how law enforcement tackles organized crime." Lily watched students playing freely in the schoolyard, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension that had gripped the community just weeks ago. Remember when Ghost first walked into my classroom? Thought he could intimidate a teacher into helping them recruit children. They never understood what they were really fighting, James replied. Thought they were just dealing with one family, one veteran. Never realized they were taking on an entire community. Doc arrived with updates from his network of veteran riders. Former gang territories across 3 states were being reclaimed by communities no longer afraid to stand together. The Crimson Riders' attempt to expand through intimidation had instead sparked a movement of resistance. You know what really destroyed them? Cooper mused, watching families enjoy the celebration. Pride. They couldn't accept being challenged by a school teacher, had to keep escalating until they destroyed themselves. Agent Torres's phone buzzed with final confirmation. Kane and the other leaders had accepted plea deals, providing evidence that would dismantle criminal operations across the country. The gang's empire, built on fear and intimidation, had crumbled completely. Latest from the FBI task force, she reported. Other criminal organizations are pulling back, abandoning similar tactics. Nobody wants to risk what happened to the Crimson Riders. Lily observed the gathered community, veterans who'd answered the call to protect their neighbors, teachers who'd refused to be intimidated, families who'd stood together against threats. They thought fear was power, she said. Never understood that real strength comes from standing together. As evening approached, James watched the celebration continue. The Crimson Riders had threatened the wrong family, underestimated the wrong veteran, and their empire had fallen as a result. But the real victory wasn't just in defeating one criminal organization. It was in showing communities everywhere that they didn't have to live in fear. Think we'll see trouble like this again? Lily asked, watching the sun set over their peaceful community. Someone will always try, James replied, but now everyone knows how to fight back. Sometimes you have to take a stand, show predators they can't simply prey on the innocent. The gathering continued as night fell, a celebration not just of victory over the Crimson Riders, but of a community's courage to stand together against intimidation. They had shown that true strength isn't found in fear or violence, but in the willingness to protect what matters most. And at Pine Valley Elementary, where it had all begun, a simple teacher and her Green Beret husband had proven that sometimes the most powerful resistance starts with one family refusing to back down from what's right. 3 months after the Crimson Riders' defeat, Lily Mitchell looked out over her 4th grade classroom, now filled with students focused on their math lesson. The fear that had once gripped Pine Valley Elementary was gone, replaced by an atmosphere of security and learning. During lunch break, she met with James in the teachers' lounge, where he was reviewing the latest intelligence reports. The ripple effects of their victory continued spreading across the country. Just got word from the federal task force, he said, showing her new documents. 3 more criminal organizations have abandoned similar school recruitment tactics. Nobody wants to risk what happened to the Crimson Riders. The impact of their stand had extended far beyond one school. Communities across multiple states had learned valuable lessons about resisting intimidation. The veteran riders who'd helped protect Pine Valley now operated a nationwide network, ready to support other neighborhoods facing similar threats. Final report from Washington came in, Agent Torres announced, joining them. The Crimson Riders case has become required study at the FBI Academy. They're calling it the Pine Valley Protocol, how community resistance can help dismantle criminal organizations. Through the window, they could see Doc conducting a safety awareness seminar for teachers and staff. The former Navy SEAL had turned his experience into a program helping educators recognize and resist criminal infiltration attempts. Remember what Ghost said that first day? Lily mused. Smart people learn to look the other way. They never understood that real strength comes from refusing to look away. James nodded, studying surveillance photos showing former gang territories now reclaimed by communities no longer afraid to stand together. That's what finally destroyed them. Not just the arrests or seized assets, but showing everyone they could fight back. Sheriff Cooper arrived with updates from his regional law enforcement network. Other communities were implementing similar protection strategies, creating partnerships between police, veterans, and civilian organizations. Latest numbers are impressive, he reported. Crime rates down 40% in former gang territories, school attendance up, business investment returning to neighborhoods they once controlled. The afternoon sun streamed through classroom windows as Lily returned to teaching. Her students worked on multiplication tables, unaware of how close their school had come to becoming a criminal recruitment center. "Mrs. Mitchell," one student asked, "is it true what they say, that you and your husband stopped bad guys from hurting our school?" Lily smiled, thinking about how their story had become part of community legend. "We had help," she replied. "Lots of brave people standing together. That's what really stops bad guys, when good people refuse to be afraid." Outside, veteran riders still patrolled regularly, their presence a reminder that the community remained vigilant. But now they were welcomed as protectors rather than feared as potential threats. "You know what's really remarkable?" Agent Torres said later, reviewing the case's lasting impact. "How many lives this changed. Not just here, but everywhere people learned they don't have to accept intimidation." As evening approached, James and Lily watched students leaving school, their laughter echoing across the playground. The Crimson Riders had threatened the wrong family, underestimated the wrong veteran, and communities everywhere were stronger because of that mistake. Sometimes, they realized, the greatest victories come not from defeating evil, but from showing others how to stand against it. The legacy of Pine Valley would inspire resistance to intimidation for years to come. 1 year after the Crimson Riders' defeat, Pine Valley Elementary hosted a national conference on community resistance to organized crime. Law enforcement officials, educators, and veteran groups gathered to learn from their experience. James Mitchell stood at the podium, addressing representatives from schools across the country. What happened here wasn't just about defeating one gang, it was about showing communities they don't have to live in fear. Lily sat in the front row, reflecting on how their stand had sparked a nationwide movement. The Pine Valley Protocol had become a model for communities facing criminal intimidation. "Final impact assessment," Agent Torres presented. "Over 200 criminal organizations have abandoned school recruitment tactics. 3 major gangs completely dismantled using our methods. Nationwide reduction in organized crime's ability to infiltrate communities. The evidence of their success filled the conference hall. Charts showing decreased crime rates, photos of reclaimed neighborhoods, testimonials from communities that had successfully resisted intimidation. "Remember how it started?" Doc asked during a panel discussion. 2 bikers thinking they could intimidate a school teacher, never realized her husband was a Green Beret who'd take down their entire organization. But the real story wasn't about military tactics or law enforcement strategy. It was about a community's courage to stand together against threats. Pine Valley had shown that true strength comes from unity, not fear. "The Crimson Riders made a fatal mistake," James explained to the gathered officials. "They thought fear was power, never understood that intimidation only works when people let it." Outside, veteran riders from across the country maintained a protective presence. What had started as a local defense had grown into a national network of community guardians. Final numbers from the Justice Department, Cooper reported. Over 300 arrests nationwide using our model. Criminal assets seized exceeding $100 million. But more importantly, communities everywhere learning to protect themselves. Lily's classroom, now a tour stop for visiting educators, remained a symbol of resistance. Where Ghost had once threatened violence, students now learned in safety, protected by a community that refused to back down. You know what really destroyed them? Torres reflected during the closing ceremony. Not just the arrests or seized assets, it was showing everyone that standing together works, that communities don't have to accept intimidation. As the conference concluded, James and Lily watched the sunset over Pine Valley Elementary. The school stood as a testament to courage, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories come from ordinary people refusing to be afraid. The Crimson Riders had threatened the wrong family, underestimated the wrong veteran, and communities everywhere were stronger because of that mistake. Their legacy wasn't just the defeat of one gang, but the inspiration for a movement that would resist intimidation for generations to come. As sunset painted the sky over Pine Valley Elementary, James and Lily Mitchell stood together where their story began. Her classroom, now a symbol of courage against intimidation, the rebuilt school stood stronger than ever, its walls no longer marked by violence, but decorated with children's artwork. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Lily said, watching students leave for the day. "Sometimes the most important battles choose you," James replied. The Crimson Riders thought they were just intimidating a schoolteacher. Instead, they triggered a movement that changed how communities fight back against organized crime. Through the window, they could see veteran riders still patrolling, not just protecting, but teaching other communities how to stand against intimidation. The Pine Valley Protocol had become more than a law enforcement strategy. It was a testament to the power of united resistance. Agent Torres's final report summed it up best. The defeat of the Crimson Riders wasn't just about tactical success or criminal arrests. It was about showing people everywhere that fear only works when we let team. That true strength comes from standing together. The sun set on Pine Valley Elementary, where it had all begun, where two bikers made the mistake of threatening a schoolteacher, not knowing her husband was a Green Beret who would dismantle their entire criminal empire. Their legacy wasn't just in defeating one gang, but in inspiring communities everywhere to stand against intimidation. If this story touched you, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Tomorrow, we've got another powerful story about courage in the face of intimidation. Remember, sometimes the greatest victories come not from having the most power, but from having the courage to stand up for what's right.